America's military presence has spread across vast countries worldwide and continues in the face of a new Cold War and tensions with its global competitors, Russia and China. The U.S. has around 750 bases in at least 80 countries. It has approximately 173,000 troops deployed in 159 countries as of 2020. With 120 active bases, Japan has the highest number of U.S. bases in the world, followed by Germany with 119 and South Korea with 73. In response to Iran's latest threats to push the Middle East into regional instability by supporting terrorist and proxy forces, the U.S. has bolstered its military forces in the Middle East. The largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East is the Al Udeid Air Base, located west of Doha, Qatar. The U.S. operates at least 30 military bases in the Middle East, including small outposts in Syria and military encampments shared with host nations. Nearly half of all U.S. military deployed abroad, some 80,100 American personnel are stationed in Japan, with 53,700, and South Korea with 26,400. Its military presence aims to strengthen alliances in the Indo-Pacific region and provide security. Europe is home to at least 60,000 U.S. troops. Germany has the highest number of U.S. troops in Europe and the second highest in the world. However, the number of troops has more than halved between 2006 and 2020, dropping from 72,400 to 33,900. Last September, the Department of Defense provided $2.2 billion under foreign military financing to strengthen the security of Ukraine and 17 of its regional neighbors. A total of 100 U.S. personnel are deployed inside Ukraine, including 71 U.S. military personnel. In 2020, the U.S., as the largest military spender in the world, spent $778 billion on its military. China ranked second at $252 billion, India at $73 billion, and Russia at $62 billion. Amidst the geopolitical tensions between Russia and China, the U.S. will create 2 naval bases in the northern portion of the Philippines archipelago, directly across from Taiwan. My colleague Harun Karčić will further elaborate on this matter with former Commander U.S. Central Command, Joseph Votel.
General Joseph Votel, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, let's talk about the role of the U.S. military in the world. You're someone who has spent a lot of time in the Middle East. We definitely see an increase in Chinese activity in the region. The Washington Post published an article not so long ago about a suspected Chinese military site in the United Arab Emirates. How is that even possible in a country that is considered a staunch U.S. ally?
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you. I think our listeners need to appreciate that countries in the region have their own sovereign interests and things that they are pursuing. So it should not be surprising that they are managing relationships with a variety of different partners. And I don't necessarily think the fact that United Arab Emirates, or other countries in the region talk to China or have some kind of relationships with them necessarily means that it has reduced U.S. influence or the importance they put on the U.S. Gulf relationship.
Right, but does it concern you?
It does concern me. I think it concerns everybody. As somebody who has spent a lot of time in the Middle East, America, the United States has had a long-term interest in the region. We have certainly played a role in a lot of things across the region. And I think when you look over the course of time and from our relationship going all the way back into the 1940s, I think it has generally led to more stability in a very turbulent region. It's led to more economic growth in the region. It's led to the preservation of lines of communication, not just for the United States and Western partners, but really for the globe. So yeah, it does worry me when it begins to look like some of our influence may be diminishing here.
Right.
At the as a result of other relationships being developed.
Now, the national security strategy and the national defense strategy indeed both identify great power rivalry as the most significant threat to U.S. security. Now, do you perceive Russia or China as a greater national security threat to you?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the United States views China as the pacing threat, if so to speak, meaning that this is the threat, and it is this competition that could affect our interests the greatest in the long run. I think Russia is viewed as an acute threat. Obviously, a lot of attention has been focused on their invasion and the war that they started in the Ukraine, and that's drawn a lot of attention to this. But their ability to impact things certainly remains very, very great. But I think it's very clear that the long-term interests of the United States are most challenged by China.
Right. The liberal international order was created by the United States with the support of its allies in the years immediately after World War II. At that time, the U.S. was the only country with both the capacity and the willingness to establish a new international order. Do you feel that this international order is now being challenged by Russia and China?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily being challenged by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but I do think it is being challenged by China and their very aggressive overseas strategy of building belts and roads and using their economic prowess to exert influence and coercion on a variety of countries around the world. So I'm more concerned about the liberal world order that the United States and its Western partners put in place after World War II being challenged by China than I am by Russia.
Right, but in the Balkans, Russia is the one that is being perceived as a greater security threat.
Well, certainly, yeah, I think that makes sense. Certainly people in Eastern Europe are closely watching and seeing what is happening in the Ukraine, and that is of significant concern. I'm not suggesting that's not of concern to the United States. As you know, billions and billions and billions of U.S. tax dollars have been poured into supporting the Ukrainian forces, and our president repeatedly has reinforced our commitment to Ukraine in terms of this. So I don't think we take that lightly, but when you look at U.S. global interests and the long-term health of our democracy and our way of life, it is threatened more by China than it is by Russia. I think in most Americans' views, and I think certainly in the view of the U.S. government.
Right. A key element of the traditional U.S. role in the world since World War II has been to defend and promote freedom, democracy, and human rights, as well as universal values, while criticizing and resisting authoritarian and illiberal forms of government where possible. So while in the Middle East, the U.S. has often allied with monarchies and non-democratic regimes in Eastern Europe, the U.S. Stood by democracies after the fall of communism. So how would you explain these two different approaches?
Well, I think diplomacy requires a lot of pragmatism, and we do have to look at the situations that we are presented with, and in some cases that means that we have to have relationships with more authoritative governments to preserve our interests. Looking at the Middle East, I mean, it was President Roosevelt who met with the first Saudi king back in the 1940s near the end of World War II to cement the relationship. Our interest at that time was really about having free and open access to petroleum products that were coming from the Middle East. They were essential to not only our economy at the time, but to the economy that we envisioned in the future. And so, in order to do that, we do have to establish relationships with partners who may not necessarily share the same form of government that we do. I think we recognize that, so our relationships have to reflect that. I would just also add that as a military officer, I think it's important that we do have communication channels to those that we view as adversaries. And I'm not suggesting anybody in the Middle East, any of these countries in the Middle East, is an adversary. They're not. They're partners. But my point is that we have to be able to talk to people, and oftentimes that requires us to create mechanisms and processes by which we can talk with governments and leaders who may not share all the same values that we have. I think our belief is it is through dialogue, it's through diplomacy that long-term change actually takes place. And so if you're not engaged in that, then you really minimize the opportunities to create change in a way that we envision.
Right. Speaking of Eastern Europe, are we back to Cold War settings? I mean, the U.S. has increased its military presence in Poland and the Baltics since last year. Defense spending is up by allies. Finland has significantly expanded NATO's border with Russia. Where is all this leading us?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the same comparison to the Cold War. I don't think Russia today is close to what the Soviet Union posed against us in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80 and throughout the 80s. In that case, the Soviet Union was leading the Warsaw Pact, a group of nations who was aligned against NATO, had created kind of this standoff in Europe. In this particular case, I think what you're seeing here is you're seeing Russia, for almost inexplicable reasons, launch an unprovoked attack into Ukraine, and now have continued to sustain that, which has wreaked unimaginable damage not only on Ukraine, but has caused a significant loss of Russian life as well. So, to me, these really are two different things. Certainly, Russia as a nuclear power poses a threat to the region. That's of some concern, and that may create some of these Cold War-like tunes here, but I don't think we're back in a Cold War. I think this is very clear. I think this is Europe, Eastern Europe, the world for the most part against Russia for their incursion into the Ukraine.
Right, but has the invasion of Ukraine reinvigorated NATO as an alliance? Has it given it a new life?
It absolutely has. Mr. Putin's invasion has done more to bring NATO together than almost anything in the last several decades, and that's a good thing. I think it's proved the resiliency of the alliance. It's demonstrated the relevance of it, and it's led to growth in the alliance. Most recently with Finland, and so I think this is positive for the alliance and for democracy-loving countries.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about Central Asia? I mean, the region is rich with resources and economic activity, and its leaders have shown signs that they are dissenting with Russia, which has had significant control over them since the collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean, should the U.S. use this opportunity to reach out to Central Asian states and sort of divert them away from Moscow?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to have good relationships with the countries across Central Asia. Having visited a number of these countries and talked with their leaders, they certainly play a critical role in the movement of resources and supplies and other things there. I mean, this was at one point the crossroads of the world. So these are extraordinarily important areas. And I do think through our diplomacy, through our military cooperation, through a variety of other things that we can do, we should develop strong relationships with the leaders and the administrations of these countries. I think it's in our interest, and I think it gives them an alternative to always turning and looking towards Russia. Frankly, I think many of them would prefer to have good relationships with us, and that doesn't mean we have to have lots of troops on the ground. In fact, we don't need many troops at all. What we do need is engagement, and we do need strong diplomacy to engage with our partners across Central Asia.
Right. When we look at the world today, it seems to be messier than ever with wars, catastrophes, and chaos everywhere. Is the world really in a greater disorder than ever before?
Well, I think what we're seeing through, probably because of a variety of reasons, most prominently the internet and the almost immediate availability of information and the increases in misinformation and disinformation. I think we have perhaps become a more polarized world, and this, I think, is bringing conflict and tensions that, for the most part, have always been in place, much more to the forefront. So we are seeing all of these things much more acutely, and of course, this is creating the impression that we are at a greater level of chaos or turbulence around the world. I'm not sure I'm the one that can answer that question. And I mean, I certainly understand how people can see that, but I think a lot of this is being caused just by the environment in which we operate in. And I think we're seeing a lot of these underlying tensions that are now being exposed much more than they have ever been, and so they're coming into greater focus. And I think this is bringing more of this out, and it is causing a perception or a belief that there is actually more turbulence out there. And perhaps in some places there may actually be. I mean, we're all watching Sudan right now and what is happening there. Certainly, this is not good for Africa. It's not good for Sudan. It's not good for the region. I definitely get how people view the world as more turbulent and unstable today.
Right, and finally, I mean, when you add and deduct all the challenges that the U.S. has been facing over the last couple of years.
Absolutely. The United States still maintains the willpower and the capacity to be the world leader that it has been for many decades and will be for many decades going forward. The United States has a lot of capabilities. Most importantly, we have great people in our country who care about what our country means, what our country has done. They care about our partners, and I remain very bullish and confident in my own country.
Right. General Joseph Votel, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Despite America's advantage in dominating the world with its military footprint, Russia and China seek to advance a new world order. In response to the competition between the three countries, China and Russia are heading towards particular strategies to gain an advantage. One of the strategies is using advanced technology such as hypersonic missiles. Despite sanctions, Russia can still access technology to keep up with the USA and its European partners. American officials noted a surge in chips and other electronic components sold to Russia through Armenia, Kazakhstan, and other countries. China leads in 37 of 44 technologies tracked in a year-long Australian Strategic Policy Institute project. The second strategy is maintaining influence in countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East that are neglected by the U.S. due to its suspicions. Instead, these countries prefer funding from China to aid their economic development and infrastructure. In the face of a new Cold War, the U.S. is focusing on strengthening and expanding bases in Asia to maintain its global power, while Russia and China stand in the U.S.'s area of interest. Where is America strengthening its ties now in the face of a new Cold War? And can such a country maintain global power alone, or will it need stronger support from its allies?